I'm Amanda Wilson, 32, a wedding photographer who once believed in fairy tale endings. Growing up in a small Connecticut town with loving parents, I thought I understood what true love looked like. Then I met James at my friend's wedding, charming, handsome, the perfect catch. Our relationship started like a dream but transformed into something I couldn't recognize. Now I'm hiding a bruise that tells a different story. Before I tell you how my husband ended up on his knees in my parents' living room, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe to hear more stories of women who fought back. Photography has always been my passion. Ever since my parents gave me my first camera for my 16th birthday, I knew I wanted to capture beautiful moments forever. By the time I turned 22, I had started my own wedding photography business in my hometown of Millbrook, Connecticut. There's something magical about weddings. The joy, the promises of forever, the belief that love conquers all. I documented hundreds of couples saying, "I do," but never imagined I would be the one walking down the aisle anytime soon. That all changed on a perfect June day 10 years ago when I was photographing my college friend Stephanie's wedding. I was adjusting my equipment during the cocktail hour when a deep voice behind me asked, "Does the photographer ever get to enjoy the party?" I turned around and saw him for the first time, James Wilson, with his warm brown eyes and disarming smile. He was the hospital administrator where Stephanie worked as a nurse, and he'd come alone to the wedding. "I'm working," I replied with a professional smile, though something about his presence made my heart beat faster. "Even artists need to eat," he insisted, offering me a plate of hors d'oeuvres he'd apparently assembled just for me. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught me off guard. That small act of kindness was the first of many. James asked for my number that night, promising he only wanted to see the wedding photos when they were ready. 3 days later, he called, but it wasn't about the pictures. He wanted to take me to dinner. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant where he listened intently as I talked about my photography business. Most guys I'd dated had treated my career as a cute hobby, but James asked thoughtful questions about my artistic vision, business challenges, and goals. When I showed him some of my favorite shots on my phone, he studied each one carefully. "You have a gift, Amanda," he said. "You don't just capture images, you capture feelings." Over the next few months, we fell into an easy relationship. James was everything I thought I wanted, intelligent, ambitious, and supportive of my career. He sent me encouraging texts before big shoots and surprised me with a new camera lens on my birthday. When I landed a high-profile client, he bought champagne and toasted to your success. After 6 months, he met my parents. My father, Thomas, a retired police officer, was initially reserved as he was with any man I brought home, but James won him over with genuine questions about his career and fishing hobby. By the end of the evening, they were planning a fishing trip together. My mother, Linda, a former nurse, appreciated James's stories about healthcare administration and his obvious affection for me. "He looks at you the way your father still looks at me," Mum whispered as we washed dishes after dinner. "That's rare, honey." When James proposed after a year of dating, it felt right. The proposal wasn't extravagant. Just the two of us on a weekend trip to Cape Cod, walking on the beach at sunset. He had tucked the ring box inside my camera bag, knowing I'd find it when I reached for a lens change. The simplicity and thoughtfulness felt perfectly us. We decided on a small wedding in my parents' backyard, where I'd photographed numerous ceremonies, but never imagined having my own. James supported all my ideas, only insisting that we hire an excellent photographer so I could fully experience my day without working. Seeing my parents' pride as my father walked me down the aisle between the rose bushes he had tended for years just for this moment made everything perfect. Our first year of marriage seemed blessed. We complemented each other well. His structured, organized nature balanced my more creative, spontaneous approach to life. We'd spend Sunday mornings planning our week ahead, respecting each other's commitments, and finding time for date nights, no matter how busy we got. When my business expanded and I needed a proper studio, James helped me research locations and attended open houses with me. When we found the perfect spot, he surprised me by negotiating an excellent lease rate. With both our careers advancing, we decided to buy our first home together, a charming colonial with a converted garage that could serve as my home office and studio for consultations. Located in a nice neighbourhood about 30 minutes from my parents, it seemed like the perfect place to build our life together. I converted one of the bedrooms into a dark room for my film photography projects, and James created an efficient home office in the den. We spent weekends picking furniture, painting walls and planting a garden. In the evenings, we'd sit on our back porch, drinking wine and talking about our future. Maybe children in a few years, definitely travel, and always supporting each other's dreams. My wedding photography business continued to grow through referrals and a few well-placed ads. James seemed genuinely proud when I showed him the glowing reviews clients left, and he'd often help me carry equipment to my car before big events. Looking back now, those early days seem like a dream, one where I truly believed I'd found my happily ever after. The changes were so subtle at first that I barely noticed them. Around 18 months into our marriage, James received a significant promotion at the hospital, becoming the director of operations. It came with a substantial salary increase, but also much longer hours and greater responsibilities. He'd come home exhausted sometimes, not wanting to talk about his day. I understood. Stress affects everyone differently. At the same time, my photography business was thriving. Wedding season meant I was booked almost every weekend, often with back-to-back events that left me equally tired. Our schedules rarely aligned anymore. When I was free on weekdays, James was working. When he had weekends off, I was often shooting weddings until late in the evening. The first comment that should have raised a red flag came after a particularly exhausting weekend, where I'd photographed a Friday evening wedding and an elaborate Saturday affair that ran until midnight. "You look terrible," James said when I shuffled into the kitchen Sunday morning, still wearing my oversized sleep shirt. "Can't you at least put on something decent? What if someone stops by?" The criticism stung, but I brushed it off. He was right. I was a mess. I hadn't even washed off all my makeup from the previous night. But similar comments started coming more frequently. "That outfit makes you look unprofessional," he'd say before client meetings. "Your hair looks better straight. Why did you curl it? You're wearing that much makeup to a simple dinner party." Each time I adjusted, changed my clothes, straightened my hair, wiped off some lipstick. It seemed easier than arguing, and after all, didn't he just want me to look my best? Our arguments started over small things too. The dishes I'd left in the sink because I rushed out to meet a client. The laundry I hadn't folded. The dinner I didn't have time to prepare. James had always been organised, but now he seemed to require perfection in our home. "I work just as hard as you do," he said during one argument, "but I still managed to keep things in order." What I didn't mention was that I'd seen him checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. It happened first after I received several late-night texts from a bride panicking about rain forecasts for her wedding day. When I confronted him, he shrugged it off. "I was just seeing what time it was," he claimed, but I'd caught him scrolling through my messages. A few weeks later, he questioned me about a text from Mark, a videographer I frequently collaborated with on weddings. "Who's Mark? And why is he asking about meeting for coffee?" James asked, his tone casual, but his eyes intense. "He's the videographer I've worked with at least 10 times, I explained, surprised by the question. "We're coordinating for the Anderson wedding next month. Seems unprofessional to meet for coffee rather than a proper business meeting in your studio," James replied. After that, I noticed James would often ask detailed questions about who attended my shoots, particularly when I mentioned male clients or colleagues. He never accused me of anything directly, but his questions felt loaded. The financial changes came next. Despite my business bringing in substantial income, James suggested we consolidate our finances more carefully. He created detailed spreadsheets tracking every expense and questioning purchases he deemed unnecessary. "Do you really need another lens when you have 3 already?" he'd ask. "Is this software upgrade essential right now?" He framed it as being financially responsible, but soon I found myself texting him before making even small purchases for my business, investments that previously I would have made independently. Our social life began to shrink as well. James found reasons to cancel plans with my friends. He was too tired, had early meetings, or thought the weather was too bad for driving. When we did attend social gatherings, he'd often want to leave early, or would sit silently beside me, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that made everyone relieved when we departed. My weekly lunches with Jenna and Tara friends since high school became monthly, then rarely happened at all. James didn't forbid these friendships, but he made them difficult to maintain with comments like, "I thought you were too busy for dinner with me, but you have time for lunch with them," or "Didn't you just see them last month?" My parents noticed the changes during our monthly family dinners, though they didn't say anything directly. I caught my father watching with narrowed eyes when James corrected my table manners or interrupted me mid-story. My mother would give me searching looks when James made decisions for both of us without consulting me, which restaurant we'd go to next time, which movie we'd watch afterward. But I had explanations for everything. James was under pressure at work. The hospital was undergoing budget cuts. He was concerned about our financial future. He valued quality time, just the two of us. I repeated these justifications to myself so often I almost believed them. Looking back now, I can see I was being gradually isolated and controlled, but at the time, each individual change seemed reasonable enough that I adjusted my life to accommodate it. Like a frog in slowly heating water, I didn't realize I was beginning to boil. 2 years into our marriage, James's criticism became relentless. Nothing I did seemed right anymore. My photography style was becoming too artsy and less commercial. The meals I cooked were bland or too experimental. The way I organized my office was chaotic. My choice in friends was immature. My wedding photography schedule became our biggest source of conflict. Summer wedding season meant working most weekends, often from early morning preparations until late-night receptions. "You're never home anymore," James complained one Sunday morning after I'd returned past midnight from a lavish wedding. "We never have quality time together." "It's just seasonal," I explained, exhausted from the 12-hour shoot. "You know summer is always busy with weddings. Maybe you should be more selective about which clients you take." He suggested, his tone reasonable, but his eyes hard. "Especially the ones that keep you out so late." When I mentioned a high-profile client who had booked me for his daughter's wedding, a local business owner known for his television commercials, James's demeanor changed instantly. "Rick Thompson, the car dealership guy." His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "Isn't he divorced 3 times? I don't like the idea of you spending a whole day with someone like that." "I'll be photographing his daughter's wedding, not dating him," I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm coming with you," James announced. "You hate weddings where we don't know anyone," I reminded him. "Not anymore. I want to see what's so important that you prioritize it over spending time with your husband." This became a pattern. Any client James deemed suspicious, which seemed to be any powerful or wealthy man, warranted his attendance. He'd show up near the end of shoots claiming he was just picking me up, but actually monitoring my interactions. Professional conversations with male clients or vendors became uncomfortable with James hovering nearby, introducing himself as Amanda's husband, with unusual emphasis. Several long-time photography clients noticed the change. After one wedding, where James insisted on staying for the entire reception, my friend and frequent second shooter Sarah pulled me aside. "What's going on with James?" she whispered. "He followed you around all night and glared at the best man every time you photographed him." "He's just being protective." I said automatically, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. That's not protection, Amanda. That's possession, Sarah replied, concern in her eyes. We didn't work together much after that conversation. James found reasons why Sarah wasn't reliable or professional enough for my brand. My once vibrant social circle continued to shrink. James created friction with virtually all my friends. He'd question their motivations, criticize them after visits, or create such tension during gatherings that eventually invitations stopped coming. My childhood friend Katie tried to maintain contact, but after James coldly analysed her recent divorce during a dinner party, suggesting she was partially to blame, she stopped calling. Your friends don't understand the demands of a real relationship, James said when I mentioned missing my social connections. They're all too immature or damaged to maintain what we have. His temper began revealing itself in frightening ways. It started with slamming doors when arguments didn't go his way, then came raising his voice to levels that made me physically recoil. During one fight about my upcoming work schedule, he swept all the contents of our kitchen counter onto the floor, including my grandmother's antique ceramic bowl that shattered beyond repair. The incident left me shaking, but James transformed almost instantly from rage to remorse. Look what you made me do, he said quietly, kneeling to pick up the broken pieces. If you hadn't pushed me so hard about this ridiculous wedding schedule, this wouldn't have happened. I found myself apologizing to him for the broken bowl my grandmother had given me. Financial control tightened as well. James insisted on approving all purchases, requiring receipts for everything I bought. When I invested in a new professional camera body, essential for my work, he didn't speak to me for 3 days, calling it financially irresponsible, despite the business account having more than enough to cover it. We need to be planning for our future, he'd say. Your little photography business isn't sustainable long-term. My little business was bringing in nearly as much as his hospital salary, but I began to doubt my own success. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I was being irresponsible. The worst incident before the actual physical violence occurred during an argument about a destination wedding I'd been offered in Napa Valley. The 3-day event would be highly profitable and excellent for my portfolio. But James was livid about me travelling alone. Who's going to be there, he demanded. Who recommended you? Which men will be working alongside you? When I tried explaining the professional opportunity this represented, his face contorted with rage. He stormed into my office, grabbed my equipment bag, and threw it across the room. My backup camera shattered against the wall lenses scattered across the floor. I stood frozen, staring at my damaged equipment and feeling something break inside me as well. But the most terrifying part wasn't the violent act. It was how quickly he switched to apologetic, helping me gather the broken pieces while explaining that his reaction came from love. I just worry about you, he said softly. You don't see how men look at you. You don't understand the dangers. By this point, I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to anticipate what might trigger his anger. I started turning down larger jobs to avoid conflict. I stopped mentioning male clients altogether. I began cancelling the monthly lunches with my parents, afraid they would notice the growing tension or that James would say something revealing in his increasingly unpredictable moods. Yet despite everything, some part of me still loved the man I thought I'd married. I clung to memories of our early days, convinced the real James was still in there somewhere, just buried under work stress and insecurity. I told myself all marriages had rough patches, that things would improve once the current hospital reorganisation was complete and his workload decreased. I was trapped in a maze of my own rationalisations, each one leading me further away from the truth of what our relationship had become. It happened on a Friday. A last-minute call came from a prominent family whose photographer had cancelled just 2 days before their daughter's wedding. The father was frantic, offering well above my normal rate if I could possibly fit them in. It was a major opportunity. the kind that could lead to connections with some of the wealthiest families in Connecticut. Without thinking it through, I immediately accepted. Only afterward did I remember James and I had dinner plans that night. Nothing special, just our usual Friday evening routine. I called to tell him about the change of plans, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail explaining the situation, emphasizing the professional opportunity and additional income. Boom. I even suggested we could go somewhere extra nice next weekend to make up for it. The wedding was beautiful but stressful given the last-minute nature. The bride was understandably anxious, which made capturing natural moments more challenging. The reception ran later than expected, with the father of the bride insisting I stay to photograph their elaborate sparkler send-off. By the time I packed up my equipment, it was after midnight. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and professional satisfaction. Despite the challenges, I knew I'd captured some exceptional moments. The father of the bride had been particularly appreciative, shaking my hand warmly and promising to recommend me to all their friends. The house was dark when I arrived home, except for a single light in the kitchen. I found James sitting at the table, still fully dressed, despite the late hour, an untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. "How was your big emergency wedding?" he asked, his voice unnervingly calm. "It went really well," I said, cautiously, setting down my equipment bags. "The family was lovely, and they want to recommend me to their friends." "I'm sure they do," he replied with a strange smile. "Especially the father, I bet." "What's that supposed to mean?" "You tell me. You're the one who dropped everything for this man you've never met before." "It was a job, James. A really good one. So good you couldn't even answer your phone all night." He held up his cell phone, showing multiple outgoing calls to me. "I was working. You know I silence my phone during ceremonies and receptions. I checked during breaks, but there weren't many." James stood up suddenly, making me step back instinctively. "The father of the bride," he said, moving closer. "What's his name? William Sullivan. He owns that chain of luxury car dealerships." "Sullivan," James repeated. "Rich guy. Probably used to getting what he wants." "It wasn't like that. He was just grateful I could help on short notice." "And how exactly did you help him, Amanda?" James was now standing directly in front of me, his breath smelling of whiskey despite the full glass on the table. "I photographed his daughter's wedding," I said firmly, trying to hide my growing fear. "That's all. That's all," he mimicked. "That's why you're coming home at nearly 1 a.m. smelling like cologne." I hadn't noticed any cologne on me, but perhaps being in close quarters with hundreds of well-dressed guests had left some trace. "I was in a room with over 200 people," I explained. "I'm sure all kinds of smells got on my clothes." "Don't lie to me!" His shout made me flinch. "I saw the way you left here today, all dressed up for your client." I was wearing my normal work clothes, James. Black pants and a blouse, the same thing I wear to every wedding. His hand shot out suddenly, grabbing my upper arm with such force that I gasped. His fingers dug into my flesh as he pulled me closer. "You're hurting me," I said, my voice shaking. "You're hurting us," he hissed. "Every time you choose these strangers over our marriage, every time you dress up for other men, every time you come home late, smelling like someone else." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. In the struggle, he yanked my arm roughly, twisting it at an awkward angle. The pain was immediate and intense. "James, stop. You're really hurting me." Something in my voice must have broken through his rage. He released my arm suddenly, as though my skin had burned him. We both looked down at the same moment to see angry red marks where his fingers had been, marks that would later develop into the dark, purple bruise I would try desperately to hide. The room fell silent except for my ragged breathing. James's expression transformed from anger to shock to horror in rapid succession. "Amanda, I didn't mean," he stammered, reaching toward me. I stepped back, cradling my injured arm. "Don't touch me. Baby, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I would never hurt you on purpose. You know that, right?" His eyes filled with tears. "This isn't me. You know this isn't who I am." And the terrible truth was, I wasn't sure anymore who he was, or who we were together. The boundary that had been crossed felt monumental, yet some part of me still wanted to believe this was an isolated incident, that the man I married wouldn't deliberately hurt me. I've been so stressed at work, James continued, his voice breaking. The new hospital director is threatening department cuts. I've been afraid of losing my job, and I didn't want to worry you. He sank to his knees in front of me, tears now streaming down his face. Please forgive me, Amanda. I promise nothing like this will ever happen again. I'll get help. I'll talk to someone about managing stress. Please just don't give up on us. Looking down at him, this broken, remorseful version of my husband, I felt a confusing mixture of fear, pity, and lingering love. I said nothing as he continued to promise change, beg forgiveness, and explain away his behavior. That night, I slept in the guest room with the door locked. The next morning, James was extra attentive, making breakfast and speaking in soft, gentle tones. He'd placed a brochure for a therapist on the counter, evidence he said that he was serious about getting help. The bruise on my arm darkened over the next day, a visual reminder of what had happened. I wore long sleeves despite the warm weather, applied makeup to the visible edges, and cancelled a scheduled shoot claiming a family emergency. I told no one what had happened, consumed by a complicated mix of shame and hope. Shame that I had somehow allowed my marriage to reach this point, and hope that James's remorse was genuine. I convinced myself that keeping this secret was the right thing to do, that all marriages had moments of crisis, that speaking the truth aloud would make it somehow more real and irreversible. For 3 days, I carried this secret, believing my concealment was perfect. Then came Sunday dinner at my parents' house, a family tradition I couldn't avoid without raising suspicion. The drive to my parents' house that Sunday felt interminable. James suggested we take separate cars, claiming he might be called into the hospital for an emergency. I knew it was really to give himself an escape route if things became uncomfortable, but I agreed, relieved to have some space. My parents lived in the same 2-story colonial where I'd grown up, with its familiar wraparound porch and my mother's carefully tended flower beds. Normally, the sight filled me with comfort. Today, it filled me with anxiety. Could I really sit through an entire meal pretending everything was fine? James would arrive later, having invented a work call he needed to complete first. This gave me time alone with my parents, which normally I would have welcomed. Now, it felt dangerous. "There's my girl," my father called from the porch swing as I pulled into the driveway. At 65, Thomas Baker remained fit from years on the police force, followed by an active retirement of fishing and woodworking. His observant eyes had lost none of their sharpness. I waved, keeping my injured arm close to my body and grateful for the light cardigan I wore despite the warm day. "Hi, Dad. Where's Mum?" "Kitchen, of course. Making enough food to feed an army as usual." Inside, the house smelled of roasting chicken and my mother's famous garlic potatoes. Linda Baker stood at the counter chopping vegetables for a salad, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up with a smile that quickly turned appraising. "You look tired, honey," she said, wiping her hands on her apron before embracing me. "Everything okay? Just busy with wedding season," I replied, the lie bitter on my tongue. "You know how it gets this time of year." Mum nodded, though her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "James coming later. He had some work to finish up. He'll be here soon." "Well, make yourself useful while we wait," she said, handing me a colander of tomatoes. "These need washing for the salad." I rolled up my sleeves without thinking and began rinsing the tomatoes under cool water. The rhythmic task was almost soothing until I noticed my mother had stopped chopping. Following her gaze, I realized my mistake. The bruise on my upper arm was fully visible dark purple against my pale skin and unmistakably the shape of fingers. My mother said nothing, simply setting down her knife and turning off the faucet. She gently took my wet hands in hers, patting them dry with a kitchen towel, then carefully rolled my sleeve back down. Her eyes, when they met mine, contained a knowing sadness that broke something inside me. "Did James do this?" she asked quietly. I opened my mouth to deny it, to create some plausible explanation about bumping into a doorframe or carrying heavy equipment, but no words came out. Instead, my eyes filled with tears, and a small, involuntary nod betrayed the truth. "Oh, Amanda." The gentleness in her voice undid me completely. Tears streamed down my face as she pulled me into her arms, careful to avoid touching the bruised area. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for, allowing it to happen, hiding it, or bringing this pain into my parents' home. "You have nothing to be sorry for," my mother said firmly, still holding me. "Nothing." A movement in the doorway caught my attention. My father stood there, a stack of plates in his hands, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding as he took in the scene. He set the plates down carefully on the counter, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Linda," he questioned softly. My mother released me, but kept her arm around my shoulders. "Show your father, Amanda." With trembling fingers, I rolled up my sleeve again, revealing the bruise that told the story I couldn't bring myself to speak aloud. My father's face hardened, but his voice remained gentle. "When did this happen?" "Friday night," I managed to say. "After a wedding shoot. We argued about me taking a last-minute job." Dad nodded slowly, his law enforcement training evident in his measured response. "Has this happened before?" "Not the physical part," I admitted. "But the anger, the accusations, the control, that's been building." A mixture of pain and something like resignation crossed my father's features. "We've noticed changes," he said. "The way he speaks to you, the way you've become quieter when he's around. We should have said something sooner." "It's not your fault," I insisted. "I've been making excuses, telling myself it was just stress or a rough patch." "It's no one's fault but James's," Mum said firmly. "No one deserves to be hurt by someone who claims to love them." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway silenced our conversation. James had arrived completely unaware that his secret was now exposed. My body tensed involuntarily. "We don't have to do this today," Dad said, watching my reaction. "I can tell him you're not feeling well, that dinner is cancelled." The temptation to escape was powerful, but some newfound courage kept me rooted in place. "No," I said, rolling my sleeve back down. "I need to face this. We need to face this." My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Some mixture of concern, pride, and silent communication born from decades of marriage. Dad nodded once. "Your mother and I will handle this," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "You don't need to say or do anything you don't want to." "Just follow our lead," Mum added, squeezing my hand. The doorbell rang and my father went to answer it, while Mum and I remained in the kitchen. I could hear James's voice, cheerful and normal, as he greeted my father. The sound made my stomach clench. "Sorry I'm late," James said, as he entered the kitchen, coming over to kiss my cheek as though everything were perfectly normal. "That hospital conference call went longer than expected." "No problem," my mother replied, her voice revealing nothing of what had just transpired. "We're just about ready to eat." Dinner was a surreal experience. My parents maintained an outward normalcy that was almost unnerving given what they now knew. They asked James about work, discussed an upcoming community event, and shared news about neighbours. James, oblivious to the undercurrent, chatted comfortably, occasionally placing his hand over mine in a display of affection that now made my skin crawl. I said little, pushing food around my plate and avoiding eye contact. If James noticed my unusual quietness, he didn't comment on it, perhaps attributing it to tiredness from my busy work schedule. As my mother cleared the dessert plates, my father finally broke the facade. "James, I'd like to speak with you in the living room." Something in his tone must have alerted James that this wasn't a casual conversation. He glanced at me questioningly, but I kept my eyes fixed on the tablecloth. "Of course," he replied, his voice betraying a slight tension. I remained seated as my father led James out of the dining room. After a moment, my mother touched my shoulder gently. We should join them, she said softly. Together, we walked to the living room where my father stood near the fireplace, his posture straight and authoritative, the stance he'd developed through decades in law enforcement. James sat on the edge of the sofa, looking confused, but not yet alarmed. My mother guided me to an armchair and then took a position beside my father, the two of them presenting a united front that seemed to suddenly make James nervous. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his eyes darting between my parents and me. "No, James," my father said quietly. "Everything is not okay." The living room fell into a heavy silence. My father's words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. James shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, his confident demeanour beginning to crumble under my father's steady gaze. "I'm not sure what you mean, Thomas," James said, forcing a confused smile. My father didn't raise his voice or make any dramatic gestures. Instead, he spoke with the quiet intensity I'd witnessed throughout my childhood whenever he confronted serious issues. "Amanda showed us the bruise on her arm," he said simply, "the one you gave her Friday night." James's face paled, his eyes darting to me with a mixture of shock and betrayal. "That was an accident," he said quickly. "Amanda, tell them it was an accident." I remained silent, my mother's hand resting supportively on my shoulder. "I would never intentionally hurt Amanda," James continued, his voice taking on the smooth, reasonable tone he used when managing difficult situations at the hospital. "We had an argument, things got heated, and in the confusion she was accidentally injured. I apologized immediately and promised it would never happen again." My father nodded thoughtfully, as though considering this explanation. "You know, in my 30 years on the police force, I heard that exact story hundreds of times. Almost word for word." James stiffened. "This isn't like that. You're making it sound like I'm some kind of abuser. What would you call someone who leaves bruises like that on his wife's arm?" my mother asked her, normally gentle voice hardened with controlled anger. "It was one mistake during an argument," James insisted. "Everyone makes mistakes. This isn't about one mistake," my father countered. "This is about a pattern I've been watching develop for nearly a year." James looked genuinely surprised by this statement. "What pattern?" "The way you correct Amanda when she speaks, the way you make decisions for her, the way you've isolated her from her friends, the way she calls less often and cancels plans more frequently, the way her voice changes when she talks about you, less excited, more careful." Each observation landed like a physical blow. I hadn't realized my father had noticed so much. "You're exaggerating," James said dismissively. "Every marriage has adjustments." My mother stepped forward, disappearing briefly into the hallway. When she returned, she held a small photo album I'd never seen before. She placed it on the coffee table in front of James and opened it without a word. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing me at various family gatherings over the past year. In one from Christmas, I was wearing a short-sleeved dress, and there was a faint bruising around my wrist that I'd attributed to carrying heavy equipment. In another from Easter, there was a small bruise on my shoulder visible in my sundress. In a third from my birthday dinner, the camera had captured James gripping my arm tightly as we left the restaurant, my expression showing discomfort. I'd never acknowledged even to myself. "I started taking pictures about 8 months ago," my mother explained. "Not because I knew for certain, but because I feared where things were heading. I've been a nurse for 35 years, James. I know what progressive control and intimidation look like." James stared at the album speechless for perhaps the first time since I'd known him. "We also have these," my father added, placing a folder on the table. Inside were printouts of emails between James and our bank changing account permissions, so that I couldn't make withdrawals over 200 without his approval. There were also copies of text messages James had sent me questioning my whereabouts, my clothing choices, and my associations with male colleagues. Messages I'd deleted, but that had been backed up to our shared cloud account that my tech-savvy father had apparently accessed. "You had no right," James began, his face flushing with anger. "I had every right," my father interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Not as a police officer, I'm retired, but as a father who watches his daughter disappearing before his eyes." "Amanda and I will discuss this privately," James said, standing up abruptly. "This is between us." "Sit down," my father commanded, not loudly, but with such authority that James complied automatically. "This stopped being just between you and Amanda the moment you put your hands on her." James looked to me, his expression pleading. "Amanda, this is ridiculous. Tell them we're happy. Tell them I take care of you." Until that moment, I'd been frozen, overwhelmed by the evidence my parents had gathered and the confrontation unfolding before me. But something in James's plea, the assumption that I would still defend him, still choose his version of reality over the truth, sparked a clarity I hadn't felt in months. "You don't take care of me, James," I said quietly. "You control me. There's a difference." The shock on his face at my betrayal quickly transformed to anger, then just as quickly to calculated remorse. It was like watching an actor cycle through emotions, searching for the one that would be most effective. "I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice breaking perfectly. "But I love you, Amanda. Everything I've done was out of love and concern for our future together." "Love doesn't leave bruises," my mother said simply. "Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't control." "What do you want from me?" James asked, looking between my parents with growing desperation. My father leaned forward slightly. "I want you to understand exactly where things stand right now. Amanda is our daughter. Nothing, no piece of paper, no vow, no legal arrangement will ever change that or come before it." "I'm her husband," James protested, "and I'm the man who taught her to ride a bike, who checked for monsters under her bed, who walked her down the aisle believing you would cherish her," my father replied. "So I want to be very clear about what happens next." The room fell silent again, James visibly bracing himself. "Amanda will decide what she wants to do about your marriage. That's her choice, and we will support whatever she decides," my father continued. "But know this, if you ever touch her in anger again, if you ever manipulate or control her again, if you ever cause her to feel fear in her own home again, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" James asked incredulously. "I'm stating a fact," my father replied evenly. "I have friends in every police department in this county. I have colleagues who owe me favors in the prosecutor's office. I have 30 years of knowledge about how the system works. I am not threatening anything illegal, but I am promising that any further harm to my daughter will be met with the full legal response it deserves." The calculated way my father delivered this message, not as a dramatic threat, but as a simple statement of reality, seemed to finally break through James's defenses. He sank back into the sofa, the fight visibly leaving him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice small. My mother answered this time. "I've called Rachel Torres. She's a domestic violence counsellor I worked with at the hospital. She's waiting for a call and can see you tomorrow." "A domestic violence counsellor," James repeated, looking offended. "I'm not some kind of wife beater." "That bruise on Amanda's arm says otherwise," my father noted. "One mistake doesn't define me," James insisted. "No," my mother agreed. "But how you respond to that mistake might." As the reality of his situation sank in, James's demeanor changed completely. The anger and defensiveness melted away, replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse. He slid from the sofa onto his knees, turning to face me directly. "Amanda, I'm so sorry," he said, tears filling his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. I've been under so much pressure, but that's no excuse. Please give me a chance to make this right. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. I can't lose you." Looking at him kneeling there, I felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Pity, lingering affection, but also a strange new strength born from finally acknowledging the truth. The man I'd married was on his knees begging for forgiveness, but for the first time in our relationship, I held the power to decide what happened next. My father moved to stand beside me, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. My mother did the same on my other side. Their silent presence reminded me that whatever I decided, I was not alone. In that moment, with James on his knees before me and my parents at my side, I realized that ending the silence had already begun to break the cycle of control and fear that had become my marriage. What came next would be my choice, a power I hadn't fully exercised in far too long. James remained on his knees, tears streaming down his face, waiting for my response. But I wasn't ready to give one, not yet. Years of manipulation and control couldn't be undone by one tearful apology, no matter how sincere it might appear. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly. "Go home. I'm staying here tonight." "Amanda, please," James began, but my father cut him off. "She's made her decision for tonight," he said firmly. "Respect it." For a moment I thought James might argue, but something in my father's expression convinced him otherwise. He rose slowly from his knees, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "What about tomorrow?" he asked. "What happens then?" "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I need time to think." My mother stepped forward. "Dr. Torres will be waiting for your call in the morning. Here's her number." She handed James a business card she must have prepared earlier. "Whether Amanda decides to work on your marriage or not, you need help, James." He took the card, silently staring at it for a moment, before slipping it into his pocket. "Will you at least call me tomorrow?" he asked me. "I'll contact you when I'm ready," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. James nodded, defeated. My father walked him to the door, their low voices indistinct from the living room. When Dad returned, his expression was solemn but relieved. "He's gone," he confirmed. "I've got a buddy in the department doing a drive-by of your house later tonight, just to make sure he's not doing anything foolish." The weight of what had just happened hit me all at once. My legs gave way, and I sank onto the sofa, trembling. My mother immediately sat beside me, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. "You did wonderfully, sweetheart," she whispered. "I don't know what to do." I admitted, tears finally coming now that the immediate crisis had passed. "I never thought this would happen to me. I never thought James would." "No one ever does," my father said gently, sitting on my other side. "But you're not alone, Amanda. You never were." That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of a simpler time. The next morning, my mother called my assistant Sarah to reschedule my photography appointments for the week, citing a family emergency. Sarah didn't ask questions, though I suspected she'd drawn her own conclusions long ago. My father contacted a locksmith who met us at my house while James was at work. We changed all the locks and installed a security system, not because I'd decided to end my marriage, but because I needed to feel safe while making that decision. Dad also helped me set up new banking accounts separate from James and transfer half of our joint funds, a financial safety net my father insisted upon. "You need options," he explained. "Options mean freedom to choose what's truly best for you." That afternoon, Dr. Rachel Torres came to my parents' house. With her warm eyes and gentle manner, she didn't look like what I'd imagined a domestic violence counsellor would be. She didn't pressure me to leave James or insist I press charges. Instead, she listened as I talked through the gradual evolution of our relationship from loving to controlling to physically abusive. "What you're describing is a classic pattern," she explained. "Isolation, financial control, emotional manipulation, these are all forms of abuse that often precede physical violence." "But he seemed so perfect in the beginning," I said, still struggling to reconcile the James I'd fallen in love with and the man who had grabbed my arms so violently. "Abusers rarely begin with obvious red flags," Dr. Torres replied. "The changes are gradual, so gradual that by the time physical abuse occurs, the victim's normal meter is already broken." My normal meter, I repeated the phrase, striking a chord. That's exactly it. I couldn't see what was happening because everything had become so twisted. Dr. Torres nodded. That's why family and friends are so important. They can see changes that we might miss when we're in the middle of it. She glanced appreciatively at my parents. Over the next few days, I began the difficult process of reconnecting with friends I'd been isolated from. My childhood friend Katie came immediately when I called, bringing dinner and making no judgments when I explained the situation. My second shooter, Sarah, visited with her portfolio of our joint work, reminding me of the talented photographer I'd been before James's criticism made me doubt myself. James, meanwhile, began intensive therapy with a specialist Dr. Torres recommended. He called daily at first, but respected my boundaries when I asked him to limit contact to text messages. His messages were remorseful, but also showed signs of genuine self-reflection. I started reading about abusive behaviors and recognized myself on every page. I never thought I was that kind of man, but I can't deny the evidence. I'm so sorry for what I've done to you. And later, the therapist says I have control issues stemming from my father's alcoholism. That's not an excuse, just trying to understand why I became someone I never wanted to be. 2 weeks after moving into my parents' home, I returned to work, photographing a small wedding that renewed my passion for capturing moments of authentic love. The bride's father wiped away tears as he gave his daughter away, a stark contrast to the controlling man James had accused him of being. I found myself crying behind my camera, mourning the genuine partnership I'd thought I had. James and I began meeting in public places, coffee shops, parks, to discuss our future. Sometimes these conversations were productive, with James taking responsibility for his actions. Other times his old patterns emerged, subtle blame shifting, minimizing the abuse, even occasional anger when I refused to move back home immediately. Recovery isn't linear, Dr. Torres reminded me during our weekly sessions. For both of you, there will be progress and setbacks. The question is whether the progress outweighs the setbacks over time. I began individual therapy as well, working to understand why I had accepted behavior that now seemed so obviously wrong. I discovered patterns from my own past, a people-pleasing nature, a tendency to take responsibility for others' emotions, a desire to see the best in people even when evidence suggested otherwise. My photography business, which had begun to falter under James's criticism and control, flourished as I reclaimed my artistic vision. I hired Sarah as a permanent assistant, and together we created a signature style that attracted clients who valued emotional, authentic images over perfectly posed portraits. 4 months after that Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I made my decision. James had completed his initial intensive therapy program and joined a group for men working to end their abusive behaviors. His progress seemed genuine, with fewer instances of falling back into old patterns of thinking. "I'll never be perfect," he admitted during one of our meetings, "but I'm committed to this work for the rest of my life, whether we stay together or not. I need to be a better man, regardless." I believed him, but I also believed what Dr. Torres had told me. Trust must be earned, not demanded, and some things, once broken, are never quite the same again. In the end, I filed for divorce, not out of anger or vengeance, but out of self-preservation and growth. I could forgive James and even recognize his efforts to change while still acknowledging that our relationship had been damaged beyond repair. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. They must be abandoned in favor of new paths forward. James accepted my decision with sadness but respect, perhaps the greatest evidence of his progress. We negotiated a fair financial settlement without attorneys, and he agreed to continue his therapy program indefinitely. My parents supported my decision without pressuring me either way. "We just want you to be safe and happy," my mother said, "whatever form that takes." I stayed in our house, reclaiming spaces that had become sources of tension and transforming them into expressions of my reclaimed identity. The home office where James had thrown my camera became a gallery wall of my favourite photographs. The kitchen where he'd criticised my cooking became a place for laughter-filled dinner parties with friends I'd reconnected with. 6 months after our divorce was finalised, I launched a new photography project documenting survivors of domestic abuse, not as victims, but as warriors who had reclaimed their lives. The women I photographed shared their stories with courage that inspired my own healing journey. One participant, a grandmother who had left her abuser after 30 years of marriage, looked at me with knowing eyes during our session. "The hardest part isn't leaving," she said. "It's believing you deserve better in the first place." Her words crystallized the most important lesson I'd learned. Recognizing your worth is the first step toward refusing to accept treatment that diminishes it. The bruises on my arm had faded long ago, but the strength I discovered in their aftermath would remain forever. Today, I still photograph weddings, but with new eyes. I watch for partnerships built on mutual respect rather than possession. I notice fathers who give their daughters away with open hands rather than controlling grips. I document vows spoken as promises to support rather than to own. Sometimes, when photographing these moments of genuine love, I feel a pang for what might have been in my own marriage, but these moments of sadness are quickly replaced by gratitude for the journey that brought me to where I am now, whole, healing, and the author of my own story. The quiet strength my parents showed that Sunday evening taught me more about love than any wedding vow. True love is not possession or control. It's standing beside someone, supporting their choices, even when those choices are difficult. It's speaking truth without raising your voice. It's protection without possession. I am still learning, still growing, still healing. But one thing I know for certain, the woman who hid her bruise in shame is gone. In her place stands someone who understands that scars, both visible and invisible, are not marks of weakness but evidence of survival. Have you ever faced a moment where someone's quiet strength spoke louder than any shout could, or recognized a pattern in your own life that you couldn't see until someone else pointed it out? Share your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of women finding their power. Remember, sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest acts of courage, like showing a hidden bruise to someone who loves you. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the strength to write your own story.